All right, the name The Gilded Age comes from an author named Mark Twain. Okay, he's a very famous American author. This is him right here in color. So it basically refers to the fact that America at the time of the Gilded Age, which is also called the Second Industrial Revolution. By the way, the First Industrial Revolution, when machinery and factories became very prominent, happened in Europe about 100 years before. Now it's our turn. So anyway, during the Gilded Age, Mark Twain remarked that America looked amazing on the outside. It looked like the land of kings, like the land of opportunity. But on the inside, the price for that opportunity, for that showiness on the outside, was a rotten core, okay? Millionaires that we call robber barons or captains of industry, they actually live like kings, while the average American lived like a dog, making only about $1 a day and basically starving to death for the most part. Not to mention the fact that the entire government almost was completely filled with people that were taking kickbacks from the robber barons. So the robber barons bought the government during this time, basically. They ruled for 35 years, from the end of the Civil War till about 1901, when Teddy Roosevelt took over. So we have a political cartoon right here, okay? This political cartoon takes place in the Senate chambers, okay? This is where the United States Senate meets. You see all the senators down here. This guy right here, he's looking back, and this one's looking back. And who are they looking back at? Well, they're looking back at all the fat cats, okay? These are the robber barons, like I said before, the captains of industry. It says Steel Trust, okay? Copper Trust, Standard Oil Trust, so that must be John D. Rockefeller. This one's probably Carnegie, okay? And these guys are taking their orders from the money bags. You'll see the money symbol right there. Now, robber barons are in plenty of political cartoons, and they're usually identified by their proper attire, okay? So they're usually going to have, you know, coattails and a top hat, something like that, maybe a cane. And typically they're older men, okay? And they're usually portrayed as fat because they're full of money. And many cartoons show the money symbol right on. In fact, in this cartoon, they're actually dressed up like money bags, okay? So basically the point of this cartoon is that the Senate takes their orders from the robber barons who are paying them to vote like they want, okay? Massive business growth, which led to the creation of the robber barons and lavish spending by the wealthy, while the average American struggled. That's basically what was happening in the Gilded Age, okay? All right, the robber barons controlled government, and acceptance of government corruption grew. Government corruption was so common back then that nobody really cared, okay? Everybody was taking money from the robber barons, all the government officials. It was just a known thing. So the Gilded Age increased the average American standard of living, okay? Now, if you remember from our basic U.S. history vocabulary, standard of living means how comfortable you are in the way you live, okay? Do you have a house? Is it a nice house? Do you have a car? Is it a nice car? Or do you have to walk to school? That kind of thing. So even though Americans were really in a bad way because of how much they were making, because they were producing so many goods at such a rapid rate, the price of those goods come down, okay? So that's kind of like inflation. The more of something there is, the less it's worth. Well, what's going on here is because of that, even though they're making $1 a day, they can buy more stuff, okay? But this also gave rise to the birth of the robber barons, okay? So the robber barons are industrialists who were perceived by some as ruthless and aggressive and loved by others, actually. Now, if you like a robber baron, you don't call him that. You call him a captain of industry, okay, if that's something you aspire to be. All right, moving on. Okay, multiple choice 10, reason for the U.S. industrial supremacy. So why were we this big powerhouse of industry? Why were we the ones that were stepping up and making more products than anyone else on earth? All right, in the late 1800s, the U.S. became an industrialist giant because of the following reasons, okay? Abundant and cheap raw materials. Now, we took a whole country from the Indians. The land had not been abused by them for the most part. So there was millions of acres of raw materials that we were cutting trees, we were getting gold and silver out of the ground, coal, anything, iron, anything you can imagine was out there in America pretty much. Oil, okay? All that stuff, and it was cheap because there's so much stuff here, okay, that hadn't been touched. Whereas the other countries, the more developed countries of Europe and areas like that, they had been living there for thousands of years and they had depleted the resources over time. So it's like finding a big pile of money, okay? Government policies favored business, okay? So back then we were very capitalist, okay? Capitalist means the government will get out of your way and let you do whatever you want to do, okay? And it doesn't hurt that the fact that the robber barons were paying off the government to let them do these things. Expanding markets to sell finished products, okay? As we conquered more territory and as we got the railroads up and running and we got the Erie Canal dug and we got the, all this stuff, then we got to ship our finished goods that we were making in the factories in the cities of the Northeast all over the world. So we weren't just selling to ourselves, we were the manufacturing base for the entire world, okay? Or we were becoming that. So one of the main things that helped us along was kerosene, okay? In 1850, kerosene is an efficient and inexpensive fuel for lamps, and it was developed then. So this is a kerosene lantern. You may have seen that in your grandparents' or your parents' house. Kerosene burns very clean and very bright, okay? Unlike the whale blubber, which the whales at the time were actually becoming harder and harder to find because for centuries we had been using whale fat to harvest for this, okay? The other thing we also used a lot of whale fat for was perfume, okay? The French did that, most notably. Now, the father of the oil industry is Edwin Drake, okay? In 1859, he drilled the first oil well in Titusville, Pennsylvania, and this is it right here, okay? This is your oil well. This is Mr. Drake standing out in front. Kind of looks like a church steeple, okay? But the thing is, we didn't know how to use all the parts of oil because if you take crude oil, it's thick, it's black, okay? And if you let it sit in a huge vat for a long time and you heat it up a little bit, the different types of oil in the crude oil will actually separate into layers. And the heaviest stuff like tar, which we use for asphalt, okay, out there on the streets, and for roofing and stuff, that settles to the bottom. That's the sludge stuck at the bottom of the barrel, okay? But the top stuff is the lightest oils, things like machine oils, okay? Kerosene's pretty high on the list. Gasoline is another one that you should be familiar with. It's another component. Motor oil. All these things are different types of oil that come out of the one barrel of crude oil. So at the time, they were considering using gasoline in the lamps, but they figured out that very rapidly that was a horrible idea because gasoline is extremely flammable, as you probably know, okay? Kerosene is much less flammable. If you take gasoline and put it in a kerosene lantern, what you basically created is a bomb, okay? Please don't do that at home, especially not in the house, okay? Your parents will not be too happy about that one. So Edwin Drake had no use for gasoline. Cars that used gasoline were very rare, okay? Most cars at the time were steam powered. Actually, no, in 1859 there would have been no cars. But the first cars were steam powered. Gasoline was not useful. Later on, Henry Ford and a few other pioneers in the automobile industry are going to start using the internal combustion engine with gasoline instead of steam. So when Edwin Drake hit oil, basically as they separated it out, the gasoline was actually just allowed to flow away into a stream, okay, a nearby river. That would never happen today. That would be an environmental nightmare. Everything around the area in those rivers were dead, okay? Edwin Drake died broke, okay? And let this be a lesson to all of you. When you go to work for a company, if possible, make sure that any ideas that you come up with go with you, okay? He was hired as an hourly worker to dig this well. And all the technology he came up with basically went straight to his boss. After the job was over, Edwin Drake was fired, and the boss patented all of Edwin Drake's ideas and basically ripped him off, and Edwin Drake died penniless. Okay, he basically died broke.